Me, Ryan, 34. Got a decent job in logistics, a mortgage, 2 cars in the driveway. Living the so-called dream, I guess. Married to Paula for about 6 years. The first few years were great. The kind of stuff you think marriage is supposed to be. We were a team. Laughed at the same stupid things, stayed up late talking, the whole 9 yards. It felt easy, natural. Then, somewhere around year 4, things started to shift. It wasn't a big dramatic event, more like a slow, quiet change in the air. Paula got really into a new circle of friends, mostly online. Her laptop became a permanent fixture on her lap. She'd be in these group chats and forums for hours. I'd come home from work, and the energy in the house would just be different. She started using a new vocabulary, words like problematic, toxic masculinity, and emotional labor started popping up in regular conversation. At first, I tried to be supportive, figured it was just a new hobby, a phase. I'd ask what she was reading, and she'd give me these vague answers about unpacking societal conditioning. I'd try to hug her when she was on her laptop, and she'd flinch, saying I was invading her space. She told me my desire for physical affection was a product of the patriarchy expecting constant access to a woman's body. I was just trying to hug my wife. It felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Every little thing I did was suddenly a symptom of some larger male failing. If I left my socks on the floor, it wasn't just messy, it was an example of weaponized incompetence. If I was tired after a 10-hour shift and didn't feel like talking, I was stonewalling her. Our old inside jokes became microaggressions. The comfortable silence we used to share was now proof of a communication breakdown. I started to feel like less of a husband and more of a case study she was discussing with her online friends. The physical side of our relationship took the biggest hit. It went from being something spontaneous and loving to something that felt scheduled. It only ever happened when she initiated, which became less and less frequent. My own attempts were always met with a sigh and an excuse. She was too tired, had a headache, or just wasn't in the right headspace. She explained that a woman's desire is a complex thing, and my linear male approach was a turnoff. I started to feel a constant low-grade sense of rejection. It grinds you down after a while. You start to second-guess yourself. Am I doing something wrong? Am I not attractive to her anymore? I tried talking to her about it a few times. I told her I missed her, that I missed us. The conversation always got twisted around. It somehow became about my needs being unreasonable. I was putting unfair pressure on her. I wasn't doing enough around the house to foster an environment of attraction. She once read me a passage from an article that said, "Men often mistake a woman's desire for intimacy with an obligation. I just wanted my wife to want me." Then came the evening that changed everything. It was a normal weekday, nothing special about it. I got home, we had dinner, the usual quiet, tense meal. Afterwards, she asked me to sit down on the couch. She turned off the TV. That's when I knew it was serious. She had this look on her face, like a manager about to announce a new corporate policy. She told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking and reading about relationship dynamics. She said that for our marriage to be truly equitable, we needed to establish clear boundaries around intimacy. I had no idea what that meant. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She had talking points prepared. She explained that the unspoken expectation for intimacy creates a power imbalance. My male libido, as she called it, put a constant subconscious pressure on her. To deconstruct this, she proposed a new system. From now on, we would be intimate once a week, on a designated day. She suggested Wednesday. That way, she explained, the guesswork would be removed. There would be no pressure, no rejection. It would be a scheduled event, like taking out the trash or going to the gym. She looked at me, genuinely proud of this idea, like she'd just solved world hunger. I just stared at her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her if she was serious. She got defensive immediately. She said my shocked reaction was proof of how ingrained my patriarchal expectations were. I tried to explain how this felt to me. I told her it sounded cold, clinical, like a business transaction. I said I didn't want to be a checkbox on her weekly to-do list. I wanted a wife who desired me, not someone who would pencil me in. The conversation went downhill fast. She accused me of not listening to her needs. She said this was about her feeling safe and in control of her own body. How could I argue with that? Any objection made me sound like a monster. It was a genius trap. If I said no, I was a toxic husband who didn't respect her boundaries. If I said yes, I was agreeing to the most passionless arrangement I could possibly imagine. I was tired of fighting, tired of every conversation becoming a lecture. So, like an idiot, I just gave in. I mumbled something like, "Okay, Paula, if that's what you need." The look of triumph on her face was something I'll never forget. She hadn't heard my pain or my reluctance. She'd only heard that she'd won the argument. That night, we slept on opposite sides of the bed, a huge cold canyon between us. The first Wednesday arrived. It was the most awkward and bizarre day of my life. I went to work feeling like I had a weird doctor's appointment scheduled for that evening. I couldn't concentrate. When I got home, the atmosphere was thick with this unspoken agenda. We ate dinner, we watched TV. Then, around 9 p.m., she looked at me and said, "Well, are we going to do this?" Like we were about to assemble some IKEA furniture. The whole experience felt hollow. There was no passion, no connection. It was a purely mechanical act. It felt like performing a chore. Afterwards, there was no cuddling, no quiet talk. She just rolled over, picked up her phone, and started scrolling. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. This was my new reality. The next few weeks followed the same pattern. I'd feel a sense of dread building up as Wednesday approached. Sometimes I'd try to make it feel more natural. I'd compliment her during the day, try to start a nice conversation, maybe suggest we cook dinner together. It never worked. My efforts were either ignored or analyzed. She told me I was overcompensating and trying to manipulate the outcome. I was just trying to connect with my wife before our scheduled slot of intimacy. The whole thing was a mind game I couldn't win. One Wednesday, I came home from a particularly brutal day at work. I was exhausted, mentally and physically. The last thing I wanted was to go through with this charade. I thought, maybe she'll see I'm tired and we can just skip it. Nope. She came into the living room where I was sitting and reminded me what day it was. Her tone was impatient, like I was late for a meeting. I went along with it, and it was the worst it had ever been. I felt completely disconnected from my own body. It was a purely physical act, devoid of any emotion. It was profoundly depressing. After that night, something inside me started to shut down. I stopped trying. I stopped trying to make Wednesdays feel special. I stopped trying to connect with her on other days. I was just going through the motions of our life together. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. And on Wednesdays perform the marital duty. I became quieter, more withdrawn. I just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Then came the incident that really broke something. It was about 2 months into this new system. A Wednesday. I got home, and she was in a bad mood. Apparently, she'd had some argument in one of her online groups. She was short with me all through dinner. I figured, okay, I guess tonight's not happening, which honestly was a relief. But then, later in the evening, she sighed heavily and said, "I guess we should get this over with. Get this over with." Those words just echoed in my head. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. We went to the bedroom, and it was just nothing. She was clearly not into it. She was just lying there, waiting for it to be done. I felt like a machine. The next day, I felt a kind of cold clarity I hadn't felt before. I realized this wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a roommate situation with a scheduled, passionless service attached. She wasn't my partner, she was my warden, and our intimacy was my ration. But the real turning point, the moment the switch finally flipped, came a couple of weeks later. Another Wednesday. I'd actually had a decent week at work, closed a big account. I was in a reasonably good mood. I got home, and Paula wasn't there. There was a note on the counter. "Went out for drinks with the girls, don't wait up." No mention of our appointment. She just canceled. With a sticky note, like you'd cancel a package delivery. I stood there in the kitchen, reading that note over and over. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I felt nothing. It was a profound, empty, and strangely peaceful nothing. The obligation was lifted. The dread was gone. I ordered a pizza. I watched a movie she would have hated. I went to bed early and slept better than I had in months. She came home late, didn't even look in on me. The next morning, she said nothing about it. No apology, no explanation. It was just a canceled appointment, business as usual. And for me, that was it. The last little ember of hope I'd been protecting finally went out. I stopped caring about Wednesday. I stopped caring about her schedule. It was just over. The part of me that had been trying, that had been hurting just went quiet. At work, people started to notice a change in me, but not in a bad way. I was more focused. I threw myself into my projects. My colleague Tom, who I'd worked with for years, pulled me aside one day during lunch. Tom's a good guy, divorced but not bitter, just pragmatic. He asked if everything was okay at home, said I seemed different lately. I was hesitant to talk about it. It felt embarrassing, but he was genuine, so I gave him the short version. I told him about the weekly schedule. I expected him to laugh or make a joke, but he just listened, his expression getting more and more serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me and said something that hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, "She didn't put a boundary on intimacy, Ryan. She put a price on it. And the price is that you have to live by her rules, on her time, and only when she feels like it. It's not a partnership. It's a power play," he went on. He said the moment a relationship becomes a list of rules and obligations instead of a source of comfort and desire, it's just a contract. He told me she wasn't treating me like a husband. She was treating me like an inconvenience she had to manage. Hearing someone else say it, someone on the outside, it validated everything I had been feeling. It wasn't me. I wasn't the broken one. The system was broken. The conversation with Tom was like a light turning on in a dark room. I went home that day with a new perspective. I wasn't going to be angry or resentful. That was a waste of energy. I was just going to stop participating in the game. The next Wednesday came around. I didn't do anything special. I didn't avoid her. I was just normal. In the evening, she gave me the look, the signal that it was time for the scheduled event. I just said, "You know what? I'm not really feeling it tonight. I think I'm just going to read for a bit." I said it calmly, without any malice. The confusion on her face was immediate. This wasn't part of the system. I wasn't allowed to say no. Only she was. She didn't know how to react. She just stammered, "Oh, okay." And then she left the room. It felt like I had taken my first breath of fresh air after drowning for months. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went out to the garage. Under a dusty tarp was my old motorcycle project, a bike I'd bought right before we got married, with dreams of restoring it. I never had the time, or rather, I never made the time. My free time was always supposed to be our time. I pulled the tarp off. I spent the entire Saturday in that garage, cleaning parts, making a list of what I needed, putting on some old music. I didn't think about Paula. I didn't think about our problems. I was just working with my hands, solving mechanical problems. It was peaceful. When I came inside that evening, covered in grease but feeling fantastic, Paula was on the couch, laptop open. She gave me a weird look. She asked what I'd been doing all day. I told her I was working on the old bike. She just said, "Huh," and went back to her screen. A week later, I signed up for a gym membership. It was one of those 24-hour places so I could go after work whenever I wanted. I started going 3, then 4 times a week. I wasn't trying to become a bodybuilder. I just needed an outlet, a place to burn off the frustration and the stress, a place that was mine. The weight room became my sanctuary. Between the garage and the gym, my evenings were suddenly full. I was busy. I was focused. I was starting to feel like my old self again, the guy I was before all this started. I was still a husband. I was still living in the same house. I was polite to Paula. We still ate dinner together sometimes, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the one waiting around, seeking approval, hoping for a scrap of affection. I was building my own life, my own happiness, right under her nose. Our home became 2 separate worlds under one roof. Her world was her laptop, her online groups, her theories about society. My world was the smell of motor oil, the clank of weights, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing progress. And I was happier in my world than I had been in a very long time. The next scheduled Wednesday arrived. She approached me again, this time a little more hesitantly. And again, I politely declined. I told her I was planning on hitting the gym after dinner. This time, she didn't just accept it. I could see the irritation on her face. She asked me what was going on. I just told her the truth. I said the schedule wasn't working for me, the whole idea of it. It had killed any desire I had left. I told her I wasn't interested in a scheduled mandatory intimacy session anymore. She launched into a full-blown lecture about how I was being manipulative, how I was engaging in passive-aggressive behavior, how this was a classic example of male fragility. The old me would have argued. The old me would have gotten defensive, tried to explain my feelings, and ended up apologizing for something I didn't do. But the new me just stood there and listened. I let her say her piece. All the buzzwords, all the accusations. When she was done, I just nodded. "I hear you," I said. "But my feelings haven't changed. I'm going to the gym." And I left. I left her standing there in the middle of the living room, fuming. For the first time, her words had no power over me. They were just noise. I realized she hadn't been listening to me at all. She was just angry that her system, her perfect little structure of control, was failing. It wasn't about connection for her. It was about compliance. And I was no longer complying. My walking out on her mid-lecture was a declaration of independence I didn't even know I was making. The immediate aftermath was silence. A very loud, very heavy silence. For the next few days, Paula treated me like I was a ghost. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me. If I entered a room, she would leave. It was a classic cold shoulder, designed to make me feel guilty and come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. A few years ago, it would have destroyed me. I would have hated the tension, the feeling that I had disappointed her. But now, it was just quiet. I found I didn't mind the quiet at all. It was peaceful. My routine didn't change. Work, gym, garage. I was making real progress on the bike. The engine was cleaned, parts were ordered. I was starting to see it take shape. It felt good to create something, to fix something that was broken and see tangible results. A stark contrast to my marriage. After about a week of the silent treatment failing to get a reaction, Paula shifted tactics. The passive aggression started. It was subtle at first, little jabs here and there. "Must be nice to have so much free time for hobbies," she'd say while I was cleaning grease off my hands. "I wish I had the luxury of spending 2 hours a day just focusing on myself." I never took the bait. I'd just give a non-committal or a simple yeah. My lack of reaction only made her escalate. She started criticizing my new habits. The money I spent on motorcycle parts was frivolous. My gym membership was a vain expense. She claimed I was neglecting my responsibilities around the house, even though I was doing the same amount of chores as always. She was trying to find a lever, any lever, to regain control over me. It was so transparent. She wasn't angry that I was in the garage. She was angry that I was in the garage and happy. My happiness was something she couldn't manage or schedule. It existed outside of her system, and that was unacceptable. I kept my conversations with her brief and to the point. I wasn't rude or mean. I was just neutral, like a polite stranger. I think that frustrated her more than anything else. She wanted a fight, an emotional reaction. I gave her nothing. Life continued like this for a few weeks. A cold war fought in the hallways of our own home. I was thriving in it. I was getting stronger at the gym. The bike was almost ready for a first test run. I was sleeping better. She, on the other hand, seemed to be getting more and more agitated. The atmosphere in the house was thick with her resentment. I could feel her watching me. When I'd come home from the gym, feeling good, she'd be on the couch, staring at me with this intense, analytical expression. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out a new strategy. And then she deployed her nuclear option. The one thing she was absolutely certain I couldn't resist. It was a Friday night. I had just gotten back from the gym and was about to head to the garage for a couple of hours. I walked into the kitchen and she was there. She wasn't in her usual sweatpants and old t-shirt. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, one I used to love. Her hair was done. She was wearing makeup. She had opened a bottle of wine and 2 glasses were on the counter. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, the way she used to talk to me. "I thought we could have a nice evening, just the 2 of us." It was a full-court press. She was trying to remind me of the woman I had married, not the person she had become. The old Ryan would have melted on the spot. He would have seen this as a sign of hope, a chance to fix things. But I wasn't the old Ryan anymore. I saw it for what it was. The most calculated move she had made yet. This wasn't about desire. It wasn't about connection. It was about power. She was losing her grip on me, and she was pulling out the big guns to get it back. She was trying to use intimacy, the very thing she had weaponized and rationed, as a tool to bring me back into line. And it was happening on a Friday, not a Wednesday. That was the most telling part. She was breaking her own sacred rule. The rules only mattered when they served her purpose. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to keep my voice even. It's nice of you to do this, Paula, but I was actually planning on finishing the wiring on the bike tonight. Her smile faltered, just for a second. The bike can wait, she said, her voice still trying to be playful. I've missed you. That line, I've missed you, almost got me. It was a ghost of our past. But it was too late. I appreciate that, I said, keeping my tone polite. But I really want to get this done. I'm really close to finishing. I walked over to the fridge to grab a bottle of water. I didn't look at her. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel her stare burning into the side of my head. I took a long drink from the water bottle, then turned to face her. The soft, inviting mask was gone. Her face was a storm of confusion and fury. She couldn't comprehend it. I had just rejected her. Me, the guy who had been begging for her affection for years. The one part of our dynamic she thought was immutable was that she was the gatekeeper and I was the supplicant. I had just flipped the entire board. "You'd rather work on that stupid motorcycle than spend time with your own wife?" she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Tonight, yes," I replied calmly. "I've been looking forward to it all day." I didn't say it to be cruel. It was just the honest truth. The thought of spending a quiet, productive evening in the garage genuinely brought me more joy than the prospect of a forced, manipulative evening with her. She just stared at me, speechless. I gave her a small nod. "Have a good night." And I walked out of the room, down the hall, and out the door to the garage. The click of that door closing behind me felt like a final, definitive sound. I knew, as I stood in the quiet of my sanctuary, that I had crossed a point of no return. I worked on the bike for hours. I got the wiring done. I felt a sense of peace and accomplishment that had been missing from my life for so long. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. I finally went back inside late that night. The house was dark and quiet. The wine bottle and 2 glasses were still on the counter, untouched. A monument to her failed maneuver. The next day the dam broke. I was in the kitchen making coffee. She came in, her face pale and her eyes red. She had been up all night, stewing in her own anger and confusion. She didn't say good morning. She just stood across the island from me and said, "We need to talk." "Okay," I said, sipping my coffee. "I'm listening." And then it all came out. It started as a flood and quickly became a tsunami of accusations. She asked me what kind of game I was playing. She accused me of punishing her for the Wednesday rule. She said I was being cruel and manipulative, withholding affection just to hurt her. She claimed I was being passive-aggressive, that if I had a problem, I should have been a man and said it to her face months ago. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She paced back and forth, her voice getting louder and more frantic with every sentence. She said she had tried so hard to make our relationship fair and modern, to create healthy boundaries. And this is how I repaid her? By acting like a child and giving her the silent treatment? She said my behavior was a textbook example of toxic masculinity, that I couldn't handle a woman having agency over her own body. She even started to cry, not real tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration, the tears of a tyrant who has lost control of her subject. She was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick, hoping to provoke a reaction, to make me feel guilty, to make me break. I let her go on. I stood there, leaning against the counter, drinking my coffee, and I just listened. I listened to all the buzzwords, all the talking points, all the blame being hurled at me, and I felt nothing. The words that used to cut me deep, that used to make me question my own sanity, they were just sounds now. They had no power over me anymore. She finally wound down, her energy spent. She was breathing heavily, looking at me, expecting something. An apology, an argument, a confession. I took one last sip of my coffee, placed the mug gently on the counter, and looked her straight in the eye. My voice was calm. It was quiet. It was the quietest thing in the room, but it was the only thing that mattered. "Are you done?" I asked. She just blinked, thrown off by the question. "Good," I said, "because now you're going to listen." "This isn't a game," I started. "There is no strategy. This isn't me punishing you. This is the consequence of your own actions. This is the end result of your system." I took a step closer, but my tone didn't change. "You didn't want a husband, Paula. You wanted a project. You wanted to deconstruct me, to fix my problematic masculinity. You read articles and talked to your friends online, and you decided that our marriage, our intimacy, was a problem that needed a spreadsheet and a schedule. I saw a flicker of protest in her eyes, but I kept going. You made a rule. Once a week. Wednesday. You thought it was so progressive, so fair. But what you actually did was, you turned the most intimate part of a marriage into a transaction. You made it a chore, like taking out the garbage or paying a bill. You'd cancel on me with a note if you weren't in the mood. You'd lie there looking at the clock. You once told me we should get it over with. Did you really think my desire for you could survive that? Did you think a man's heart is a machine you can just turn on and off once a week? She started to say something, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. The saddest part is, I tried. I went along with your ridiculous rule because I loved you, and I wanted to make you happy. I endured those hollow scheduled encounters because I hoped it was a phase, that you'd eventually see how crazy it was. But you didn't. You didn't want a partner. You wanted compliance. And when I stopped complying, you got angry. You're not mad that I don't want to be intimate with you. You're mad that I'm no longer following your rules. You lost control, and you can't stand it. I let that hang in the air for a moment. So, no, I'm not punishing you. I'm just done. That part of me that wanted you, that desired you, you systematically dismantled it. You scheduled it, bureaucratized it, and analyzed it until it was dead. You killed it, Paula, not me. And these last couple of months, I gestured around me. Working on my bike, going to the gym, that's not me being passive-aggressive. That's me finding something to fill the enormous void that you created. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to heal myself. I've found a way to be happy without you, and you can't stand it. I finished. The silence that followed was absolute. Every accusation she had thrown at me had been dismantled, not with anger, but with the cold, hard truth. Her tears had stopped. Her face was blank. It was the look of someone who had just been forced to see the unvarnished reality of their own behavior, and they had no defense against it. She had no more buzzwords, no more talking points. I had just described her actions and their consequences, and there was nothing she could say, because it was true. All of it. I didn't wait for a response. There wasn't one to give. I just turned around, picked up my gym bag, and walked out the door. Things are different now. We still live in the same house, for now at least. But we are not husband and wife. We are roommates. The Cold War is over. There's just a quiet, empty peace. She doesn't try to lecture me anymore. She doesn't try to start fights. Sometimes I catch her looking at me with a strange expression. It's not anger. It looks more like regret. But it's too late for that. I spend most of my free time in the garage. The bike is finished. It runs like a dream. Sometimes I just sit out there with it, the smell of gasoline and oil in the air, and I feel content. She got what she wanted. A marriage with no pressure, no expectations. A partnership that has been deconstructed into two separate, autonomous individuals. She created a perfectly fair, equitable, and passionless existence. And now she has to live in it. Alone. I guess in the end, you should be careful what you wish for.